John Major, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom from 1990 to 1997. Sir John Major KGCH, born the 29th of March 1943, is a British politician who served as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom and leader of the Conservative Party from 1990 to 1997. Major served in the Thatcher government from 1987 to 1990 as Chancellor of the Exchequer and Foreign Secretary, and was Member of Parliament, MP, for Huntingdon, formerly Huntingdonshire, from 1979 to 2001. Major was born in St Helier, London, leaving school in 1959 with just 3 O-levels, after working a variety of jobs and enduring a period of unemployment. Major established a career at Standard Bank. He was elected as a councillor in Lambeth, and was later an MP at the 1979 general election. He initially served as a parliamentary private secretary and an assistant whip before joining the government as a minister. After the 1987 election, he was promoted to the cabinet by Margaret Thatcher as Chief Secretary to the Treasury. He was later moved to become Foreign Secretary in July 1989, before becoming Chancellor of the Exchequer just 3 months later after Nigel Lawson's abrupt resignation. As Chancellor, he presented the 1990 budget, the first to be aired on television. In November 1990, after Thatcher resigned following a challenge to her leadership by Michael Heseltine, Major entered the second stage of the contest and emerged victorious. He was appointed Prime Minister on the 28th of November. In his first months in office, he launched the Citizens' Charter, replaced the unpopular community charge, known as the poll tax, with council tax, committed British troops to the Gulf War, and negotiated the European Union's Maastricht Treaty. Despite a severe recession, Major went on to lead the Conservative Party to a fourth consecutive electoral victory at the 1992 election, winning over 14 million votes, which remains to this day a record for a British political party, although with a reduced majority in the House of Commons. Just months later, Major was forced to withdraw the pound sterling from the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, on the 16th of September 1992, a day which came to be known as Black Wednesday. This led to a loss of confidence in Major's economic credibility, and he was never again able to achieve a lead in opinion polls again. Despite a dwindling majority, Major passed further reforms to education and criminal justice, privatized British rail and the coal industry, and signed the Downing Street Declaration, reinvigorating the Northern Ireland peace process, which would eventually help lead to the Good Friday Agreement. By 1995, splits over EU policy and the loss of numerous MPs to a series of sexual and financial scandals, widely known as sleaze, led Major to resign as party leader in June, challenging his critics to either back him or challenge him. He was duly challenged by John Redwood but was easily re-elected. This did not lead to an improvement in his political standing, and by December 1996 the government had lost its majority in the House of Commons. At the 1997 election, after the Conservatives had been in power for 18 years, Major lost to Tony Blair's Labour Party in one of the largest electoral defeats since the 1832 Great Reform Act. Major resigned as leader of the Conservative Party following defeat, and was succeeded by William Hague. Major retired from the House of Commons at the 2001 election, and has since pursued his interests in business and charity. While early assessments of his time in office saw him characterized as being a weak and unassertive leader, a reappraisal in following years saw many note his successes in the Northern Irish peace process, restoring economic growth, reforming the public sector, boosting the profile of arts and sports, and preserving British influence on the international stage. Since Thatcher's death in 2013, he has been both the oldest and earliest serving of all the UK's living former prime ministers. Early life and education, 1943 to 1959. John Major was born on the 29th of March 1943 at St Helier Hospital and Queen Mary's Hospital for Children in St Helier, Surrey, the son of Gwen Major, née Coates, 1905 to 1970, and former music hall performer Tom Major Ball, 1879 to 1962, who was 63 years old when Major was born. He was christened John Roy Major, but only John Major was recorded on his birth certificate. He used his middle name until the early 1980s. His birth had been a difficult one, with his mother suffering from pleurisy and pneumonia and John Major requiring several blood transfusions due to an infection, causing permanent scarring to his ankles. The Major family, John, his parents, and his two older siblings Terry and Pat, lived at 260 Longfellow Road, Worcester Park, Surrey, a middle-class area where Major's father ran a garden ornaments business and his mother worked in a local library and as a part-time dance teacher. John Major later described the family's circumstances at this time as being comfortable but not well off. Following a German V-1 flying bomb attack in the area in 1944 which killed several people, the Majors moved to the village of Sayham Turney, Norfolk for the duration of the war. John began attending primary school at Cheam Common School from 1948. His childhood was generally happy, and he enjoyed reading, sports, especially cricket and football, and keeping pets, such as his rabbits. In 1954 John passed the 11+ exam, enabling him to go to Rutlish School, a grammar school in Wimbledon, though to John's chagrin his father insisted that he register as John Major Ball. The family's fortunes took a turn for the worse, with his father's health deteriorating, and the business in severe financial difficulties. A recalled business loan which the family were unable to repay forced Tom Major to sell the house in Worcester Park in May 1955, with the family moving to a cramped, rented top-floor flat at 144 Coldharbour Lane, Brixton. With his parents distracted by their reduced circumstances, John Major's difficulties at Rutlish went unnoticed. Acutely conscious of his straitened circumstances vis-à-vis the other pupils, Major was something of a loner and consistently underperformed except in sports, coming to see the school as a penance to be endured. Major left school just before his 16th birthday in 1959 with just 3 O-level passes in history, English language, and English literature, to his parents' disappointment. Major's interest in politics stems from this period, and he avidly kept up with current affairs by reading newspapers on his long commutes from Brixton to Wimbledon. In 1956 Major met local MP Marcus Lipton at a local church fair and was invited to watch his first debate in the House of Commons, where Harold Macmillan presented his only budget as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Major has attributed his political ambitions to this event. Early post-school career, 1959 to 1979. Major's first job was as a clerk in the London-based insurance brokerage firm Price Forbes in 1959, though finding the job dull and offering no prospects he quit. Major began working with his brother Terry at the garden ornaments business. This had been sold in 1959, enabling their family to move to a larger residence at 80 Burton Road, Brixton. Major's father died on the 17th of March 1962. John left the ornaments business the following year to care for his ill mother, though when she got better he was unable to find a new job and was unemployed for much of the latter half of 1962, a situation he says was degrading. After Major became Prime Minister, it was misreported that his failure to get a job as a bus conductor resulted from his failing to pass a maths test. He had in fact passed all of the necessary tests but had been passed over owing to his height. In the meantime he studied for a qualification in banking via correspondence course. Eventually in December 1962 he found a job working at the London Electricity Board, LEB, in Elephant and Castle. In 1959 Major had joined the Young Conservatives in Brixton and soon became a highly active member, which helped increase his confidence following the failure of his school days. Encouraged by fellow Conservative Derek Stone, he started giving speeches on a soapbox in Brixton Market. According to his biographer Anthony Selden, Major brought youthful exuberance to the Tories in Brixton, but was sometimes in trouble with the professional agent Marion Standing. Major stood as a councillor in the 1964 Lambeth London Borough Council election for Lark Hall ward at the age of 21 in 1964, losing to Labour. He also assisted local Conservative candidates Kenneth Payne in the 1964 general election and Piers Dixon in the 1966 general election. Another formative influence on Major in this period was Jean Earons, a divorcee 13 years his elder with 2 children who lived opposite the family on Burton Road, who became his mentor and lover. Selden writes she made Major smart in his appearance, groomed him politically, and made him more ambitious and worldly. Major later moved in with Earons when his family left Burton Road in 1965. Their relationship lasted from 1963 to some time after 1968. Major left the LEB and took up a post at District Bank in May 1965, though he soon left this to join Standard Bank the following year, largely because the latter offered the chance to work abroad. In December 1966 he was sent for a long secondment in Jos, Nigeria, which he enjoyed immensely, though he was put off by the casual racism of some of the expat workers there. In May 1967 he was involved in a serious car crash in which he broke a leg and had to be flown home. Leaving hospital, he split his time between Jean Earons' house and a small rented flat in Mayfair, working at Standard Bank's London office and resuming his banking diploma and activities with the Young Conservatives in his spare time. Major stood again as councillor in the 1968 Lambeth London Borough Council election, this time for Ferndale ward. Though a Labour stronghold, the Conservatives received a huge boost following Enoch Powell's anti-immigration Rivers of Blood speech in April 1968 and Major won, despite strongly disapproving of Powell's views. Major took a major interest in housing matters, with Lambeth notorious for overcrowding and poor quality rented accommodation. In February 1970 Major became chairman of the Housing Committee, being responsible for overseeing the building of several large council estates. He also promoted more openness at the council, initiating a series of public meetings with local residents. Major also undertook fact-finding trips to the Netherlands, Finland and the Soviet Union. Despite the Lambeth housing team being well regarded nationally, Major lost his seat in the 1971 Lambeth London Borough Council election. Major met Norma Johnson at a Conservative Party event in Brixton in April 1970, and the two became engaged shortly thereafter, marrying at St Matthew's Church in Brixton on the 3rd of October 1970. John's mother died shortly before in September at the age of 65. John and Norma moved into a flat at Primrose Court, Streatham, which John had bought in 1969, and had their first child, Elizabeth, in November 1971. In 1974 the couple moved to a larger residence at Westhoke, Beckenham, and had a second child, James, in January 1975. Meanwhile, Major continued to work at Standard Bank, renamed Standard Chartered from 1975. Having completed his banking diploma in 1972, Major was promoted to head of the PR department in August 1976, and his duties necessitated the occasional foreign trip to East Asia. Despite his setback at the 1971 Lambeth Council election, Major continued to nurse political ambitions, and with help from friends in the Conservative Party managed to get onto the Conservative Central Office's list of potential MP candidates. Major was selected as the Conservative candidate for the Labour-dominated St Pancras North constituency, fighting both the February and October 1974 general elections, losing heavily both times to Labour's Albert Stallard. Major attempted to get selected as a candidate for a more promising seat, though despite numerous attempts was unsuccessful. Growing increasingly frustrated, Major resolved to make one last attempt, applying for selection to the safe Conservative seat of Huntingdonshire in December 1976, which he won. Major was in some ways an odd choice, being a born and bred Londoner in a largely rural constituency still home to many landed families. However, he was seen as being the most likely to win over the increasingly large numbers of upwardly mobile London overspill families living in the area, and he was helped to familiarise himself with the area by local MP David Renton. In 1977 the Major family purchased a house at De Vere Close in the village of Hemmingford Grey. Major took on a less demanding job at Standard Chartered, and started working part-time in 1978 so that he could devote more time to his constituency. Early parliamentary career, 1979 to 1987. Major won the Huntingdon seat by a large margin in the 1979 general election, which brought Margaret Thatcher to power. He made his maiden speech in the House of Commons on 13 June 1979, voicing his support for the government's budget. Major assiduously courted contacts at all levels of the party in this period, joining the informal Guy Fawkes Club of Conservative MPs and attending various committees. He became Secretary of the Environment Committee and also assisted with work on the Housing Act 1980, which allowed council house tenants the right to buy their homes. Major's first promotion came when he was appointed as a parliamentary private secretary in January 1981 to Patrick Mayhew and Timothy Raison, both Ministers of State at the Home Office. Seeking to gain more exposure to foreign affairs, he joined several Labour Party MPs on a fact-finding trip to the Middle East in April 1982. The group met with King Hussein of Jordan and Yasser Arafat of the Palestinian Liberation Organization in Lebanon. In Israel they were briefly caught in the middle of a shooting incident between Israeli troops and a Palestinian rock thrower. Major later became an assistant whip in January 1983, responsible for East Anglian MPs. During this period Major became also involved in the response to protests at Traf Molesworth, which lay in his constituency. Various peace groups were opposed to the sighting of cruise missiles at the base and had established a permanent peace camp there. The protesters were later evicted and an electric fence installed around the base in early 1985. Major comfortably won re-election to the now slightly enlarged seat of Huntingdon at the 1983 general election. Shortly thereafter he and Norma moved to a larger house, Finings, in Great Stukely. Major generally spent his weekends there, and weekdays at a rented flat in Durand Gardens, Stockwell. Major was invited to join the prestigious blue-chip group of rising stars in the Conservative Party, and he was promoted to Treasury Whip in October 1984. It was later revealed, in 2002, that during this period Major had conducted an affair with Edwina Currie, a Conservative backbencher and later Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, Health and Social Security. The affair ended in 1988. Major narrowly avoided the IRA's Brighton Hotel bombing in October 1984, having left the hotel only a few hours before the bomb went off. Also in this period Major stood in for a Foreign Office minister on a trip to South America, visiting Colombia, Peru, and Venezuela. In September 1985 he was made Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for the Department of Health and Social Security, before being promoted to become Minister of State in the same department in September 1986. The large size of the DHSS granted ministers a greater degree of responsibility than in other departments, with Major assisting with work on the Social Security Act 1986 and improving provision for disabled people. Major began to gain a bigger profile, giving his first speech at the Conservative Party conference in October 1986. He first attracted major national media attention in January 1987 over cold weather payments to the elderly, when Britain was in the depths of a severe winter. Amidst intense media criticism, Major discussed the issue with Margaret Thatcher and an increase in the payments were approved. In Cabinet, 1987 to 1990. Chief Secretary to the Treasury, 1987 to 1989. Following the June 1987 general election, in which Major retained his seat with an increased majority, he was promoted to the Cabinet as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, making him the first MP of the 1979 intake to reach the Cabinet. The then-Chancellor Nigel Lawson generally made major decisions with little input from others, and Major was put in charge of agreeing departmental budgets with the Secretaries of State. These discussions went well, and for the first time in several years budgets were agreed without recourse to the external adjudication of the Star Chamber. Major successfully concluded a second round of such spending reviews in July 1988. Whilst Chief Secretary, Major took part in discussions over the future funding of the NHS, against the background of an NHS strike in February 1988 over pay, resulting in the Working for Patients White Paper and subsequent National Health Service and Community Care Act 1990. Major also insisted in discussions with Thatcher that government assistance should be provided to support the sale of Short Brothers to Bombardier, an aerospace company and major employer in Northern Ireland which might otherwise have collapsed. Foreign Secretary, July to October 1989. In 1987-88 it became clear that Major had become a favourite of Margaret Thatcher and he was widely tipped for further promotion. Nevertheless, Major's appointment to Foreign Secretary in July 1989 came as a surprise due to his relative lack of experience in the cabinet and unfamiliarity with international affairs. Major found the prospect daunting, and unsuccessfully attempted to convince Thatcher to allow him to stay on at the Treasury. There were also fears within the Foreign Office, FCO, that Major would be Thatcher's hatchet man, as her relations with the department under Geoffrey Howe had been poor and characterized by mutual distrust. Major accepted the job and began to settle into the department, living in an upstairs room at the FCO and devolving decision-making where necessary, though he found the increased security burdensome and disliked the extensive ceremonial aspects of the role. Amongst Major's first acts as Foreign Secretary was to cancel the sale of Hawk aircraft to Iraq, over concerns they would be used for internal repression. He represented Britain at the Paris Peace Conference to determine the future of Cambodia. Major also met with U.S. Secretary of State James Baker, with whom he primarily discussed the issue of Vietnamese boat people, and with Gane Keekan, Foreign Minister of China, becoming the first senior Western politician to meet with a Chinese official since the violent crackdown of pro-democracy protesters in Tiananmen Square the previous month. Discussions focused primarily on the future of Hong Kong, which Britain was scheduled to hand over to China in 1997. Major spent most of a summer holiday that year in Spain conducting extensive background reading on foreign affairs and British foreign policy. Upon his return to the UK he and Thatcher met with French President François Mitterrand, in which the future direction of the European Community was discussed. In September 1989 Major delivered a speech at the United Nations General Assembly, in which he pledged to support Colombia's effort to tackle the drugs trade and reiterated Britain's opposition to the apartheid regime in South Africa. Major also met U.S. President George H.W. Bush in Washington, D.C. and Domingo Cavallo, the Argentine foreign minister, the first such meeting since the end of the Falklands War 7 years earlier. Major's last major summit as Foreign Secretary was the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, CHOGM, in Malaysia. The meeting was dominated by the issue of sanctions on South Africa, with Britain being the only country to oppose them, on the grounds that they would end up hurting poorer South Africans far more than the apartheid regime at which they were aimed. The summit ended acrimoniously, with Thatcher controversially and against established precedent issuing a second final communiqué stating Britain's opposition to sanctions, with the press seizing on the apparent disagreement on the matter between Major and Thatcher. Chancellor of the Exchequer, 1989 to 1990. After just 3 months as Foreign Secretary, Major was appointed Chancellor of the Exchequer on the 26th of October 1989 after the sudden resignation of Nigel Lawson, who had fallen out with Thatcher over what he saw as her excessive reliance on the advice of her economic advisor Alan Walters. The appointment meant that, despite only being in the cabinet for a little over 2 years, Major had gone from the most junior position in the cabinet to holding 2 of the great offices of state. Major made tackling inflation a priority, stating that tough measures were needed to bring it down and that if it isn't hurting, it isn't working. He delivered his first autumn statement on the 15th of November, announcing a boost in spending, mainly for the NHS, and with interest rates to be kept as they were. As Chancellor, Major presented only one budget, the first to be televised live, on the 20th of March 1990. He publicised it as a budget for savers, with the creations of the tax-exempt Special Savings Account, TESA, arguing that measures were required to address the marked fall in the household savings ratio that had been apparent during the previous financial year. Major also abolished the composite rate tax and stamp duty on share trades, whilst increasing taxes on alcohol, cigarettes and petrol. Tax cuts were also made which benefited football associations, the aim being to increase funding on safety measures following the Bradford City Stadium fire and Hillsborough disaster. Extra funding was also made available to Scotland in order to limit the impact of the community charge, widely dubbed the poll tax, which had been introduced there that year. The European Community's push for full economic and monetary union, EMU, was another important factor in Major's time as Chancellor. In June 1990 he proposed that instead of a single European currency there could instead be a hard E.C.U. which different national currencies could compete against and, if the ECU was successful, could lead to a single currency. The move was seen as a wrecking tactic by France and Germany, especially when the increasingly Eurosceptic Thatcher announced her outright opposition to EMU, and the idea was abandoned. More successfully, Major managed to get the new European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, located in London. By early 1990 Major had become convinced that the best way to combat inflation and restore macroeconomic stability would be if the British pound were to join the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM, and he and Douglas Hurd, Major's successor as Foreign Secretary, set about trying to convince a reluctant Thatcher to join it. The move was supported by the Bank of England, the Treasury, most of the Cabinet, the Labour Party, several major business associations and much of the press. With the Lawson boom showing signs of running out of steam, exacerbated by rising oil prices following Iraq's invasion of Kuwait in August 1990, there were fears of a potential recession and pressure to cut interest rates. Thatcher finally agreed on the 4th of October, and Britain's entry into the ERM at a rate of DM 2.95 to £1, with an agreed 6% floating band either side, was announced the following day. An interest rate cut of 1%, from 15%, was also announced on the same day. The rest of Major's chancellorship prior to the leadership contest was largely uneventful. He considered granting the Bank of England operational independence over monetary policy, with the ability to set interest rates, but decided against it. He also agreed a restructuring and write-off of some Third World debt at a Commonwealth Finance Ministers' meeting in Trinidad and Tobago in September 1990. Conservative Party leadership contest. Opposition within the Conservative Party to Margaret Thatcher had been brewing for some time, focusing on what was seen as her brusque, imperious style and the poll tax, which was facing serious opposition across the country. In December 1989 she had survived a leadership bid by Anthony Meyer, though she won easily. 60 MPs had not voted for her, and it was rumoured that many more had had to be strong-armed into supporting her. By early 1990 it was clear that bills for many under the new poll tax regime would be higher than anticipated, and opposition to the tax grew, with a non-payment campaign gaining much support and an anti-poll tax demonstration in Trafalgar Square in March ending in rioting. The Conservatives lost the 1990 Mid-Staffordshire by-election to Labour and the 1990 Eastbourne by-election to the Liberal Democrats, both Conservative seats, causing many Conservative MPs to worry about their prospects at the upcoming general election, due in 1991 or 1992. Thatcher's staunch anti-European stance also alienated pro-Europe Conservatives. On the 1st of November the pro-European Deputy Prime Minister Geoffrey Howe resigned, issuing a fiercely critical broadside against Thatcher in the House of Commons on the 13th of November. The day after Howe's speech, Michael Heseltine, Thatcher's former Secretary of State for Defence who had acrimoniously resigned in 1986 over the Westland affair, challenged Thatcher for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Both John Major and Foreign Secretary Douglas Hurd supported Thatcher in the first round. Major was at home in Huntingdon recovering from a pre-arranged wisdom tooth operation during the first leadership ballot, which Thatcher won but not by the required threshold, necessitating a second round. After discussions with her cabinet, in which many stated that though supporting her they doubted she could win, Thatcher withdrew from the contest and announced that she would resign as Prime Minister once a new leader had been elected. Major subsequently announced on the 22nd of November that he would stand in the second ballot, with Thatcher's backing. Major's platform was one of moderation on Europe, a review of the poll tax and the desire to build a classless society. Unlike in the first ballot, a candidate only required a simple majority of Conservative MPs to win, in this case 187 of 372 MPs. The ballot was held on the afternoon of the 27th of November, although Major obtained 185 votes, 2 votes short of an overall majority. He polled far enough ahead of both Hurd and Heseltine to secure immediate withdrawal. With no remaining challengers, Major was formally named leader of the Conservative Party that evening and was duly appointed Prime Minister the following day. At 47 he was the youngest Prime Minister since Lord Rosebery some 95 years earlier. Prime Minister, 1990 to 1997. Major became Prime Minister on the 28th of November 1990 when he accepted the Queen's invitation to form a government, succeeding Margaret Thatcher. His term ended with his resignation on the 2nd of May 1997. While serving as Prime Minister, Major also served as the First Lord of the Treasury, the Minister for the Civil Service and the leader of the Conservative Party. He was succeeded by Tony Blair after the 1997 general election. Final years in Parliament, 1997 to 2001. Although many Conservative MPs wanted Major to resign as leader immediately, there was a movement among the grassroots of the party, encouraged by his political allies, to have him stay on as leader until the autumn. Lord Cranborne, his Chief of Staff during the election, and the Chief Whip, Alistair Goodlad, both pleaded with him to stay on. They argued that remaining as leader for a few months would give the party time to come to terms with the scale of defeat before electing a successor. Major refused, saying, "It would be terrible, because I would be presiding with no authority over a number of candidates fighting for the crown. It would merely prolong the agony." Major served as leader of the opposition for 7 weeks while the leadership election to replace him was underway. He formed a temporary shadow cabinet, but with 7 of his cabinet ministers having lost their seats at the election, and with few senior MPs left to replace them, several MPs had to hold multiple briefs. Major himself served as Shadow Foreign Secretary, having served as Foreign Secretary for 3 months in 1989, and Shadow Secretary of State for Defence, and the office of Shadow Scotland Secretary was left vacant until after the 2001 general election as the party no longer had any Scottish MPs. Major's resignation as Conservative leader formally took effect on the 19th of June 1997 after the election of William Hague. Major's resignation honours were announced on the 1st of August 1997. He remained active in Parliament, regularly attending and contributing in debates. He stood down from the House of Commons at the 2001 general election, having announced his retirement from Parliament on the 10th of March 2000. Jonathan Jennardley took over as MP for Huntingdon, retaining the seat for the Conservatives at the 2001 election. Like some post-war former Prime Ministers, such as Edward Heath, Major turned down a peerage when he retired from the House of Commons in 2001. He said that he wanted a firebreak from politics and to focus on writing and his business, sporting and charity work. Post-parliamentary life, 2001-present. Since leaving office, Major has tended to maintain a low profile in the media, occasionally commentating on political developments in the manner of an elder statesman. In 1999 he published his autobiography, covering his early life and time in office, which was generally well received. Major went on to write a book about the history of cricket in 2007, More Than a Game: The Story of Cricket's Early Years, and a book about Music Hall, My Old Man, A Personal History of Music Hall, in 2012. He has further indulged his love of cricket as president of Surrey County Cricket Club from 2000 to 2001, and honorary life vice president since 2002. In March 2001 he gave the tribute to cricketer Colin Cowdrey at his memorial service in Westminster Abbey. In 2005 he was elected to the committee of the Marylebone Cricket Club, historically the governing body of the sport, and still guardian of the laws of the game. Major left the committee in 2011, citing concerns with the planned redevelopment of Lord's Cricket Ground. John Major has also been actively engaged in charity work, being president of Asthma UK, and a patron of the prostate cancer charity, Sight Sivers UK, Mercy Ships, Support for Africa 2000 and Afghan Heroes. In February 2012, Major became chairman of the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Trust, which was formed as part of the Diamond Jubilee of Elizabeth II and is intended to support charitable organisations and projects across the Commonwealth, focusing on areas such as cures for diseases and the promotion of culture and education. Major was a patron of the sight loss and learning disability charity Seeability from 2006 to 2012, has been a vice president since 2013. Major has also pursued a variety of business interests, taking up appointments as senior advisor to Credit Suisse, chairman of the board of senior advisors at Global Infrastructure Partners, global advisor to ACOM, chairman of the International Advisory Board of the National Bank of Kuwait, and chairman of the European Advisory Council of the Emerson Electric Company. He was a member of the Carlyle Group's European Advisory Board from 1998 and was appointed chairman of Carlyle Europe in May 2001. He stood down from the group circa 2004-05. Major was also a director at the bus manufacturers the Mayflower Corporation from 2000 to 2003, which was liquidated in 2004 due to funding issues. Following the death of Diana, Princess of Wales in 1997, Major was appointed a special guardian to Princes William and Harry, with responsibility for legal and administrative matters. As a result of this, Major was the only current or former Prime Minister out of the 5 then still alive invited to the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle in May 2018. Major has also attended the funerals of notable political figures, such as Nelson Mandela in December 2013, former U.S. First Lady Barbara Bush at St. Martin's Episcopal Church in Houston, Texas on the 21st of April 2018, and the state funeral of former U.S. President George H.W. Bush on the 5th of December 2018. Revelation of affair. Major's low profile following his exit from Parliament was disrupted by Edwina Currie's revelation in September 2002 that, prior to his promotion to the cabinet, he had had a 4-year extramarital affair with her from 1984 to 1988. Commentators were quick to refer to Major's previous Back to Basics platform to throw charges of hypocrisy. An obituary of Tony Newton in the Daily Telegraph claimed that if Newton had not kept the affair a closely guarded secret, it is highly unlikely that Major would have become Prime Minister. In 1993 Major had also sued 2 magazines, New Statesman and Society and Scallywag, as well as their distributors, for reporting rumours of an affair with Claire Latimer, a Downing Street caterer, even though at least one of the magazines had said that the rumours were false. Both considered legal action to recover their costs when the affair with Currie was revealed. In a press statement, Major said that he was ashamed by the affair and that his wife had forgiven him. In response, Currie said he wasn't ashamed of it at the time and he wanted it to continue. Political engagement. Major has become an active after-dinner speaker, earning over £25,000 per engagement for his insights and his own opinions on politics and other matters according to his agency. Major is also actively involved in various think tanks, He is currently a president of Chatham House, a member of the international advisory boards of the Peres Center for Peace in Israel, the Interaction Council, the Baker Institute in Houston, and a patron of the Atlantic Partnership. Major was also a director with the Ditchley Foundation from 2000 to 2009, and a president of the influential centre-right think tank the Bow Group from 2012 to 2014. In February 2005, it was reported that Major and Norman Lamont delayed the release of papers on Black Wednesday under the Freedom of Information Act. Major denied doing so, saying that he had not heard of the request until the scheduled release date and had merely asked to look at the papers himself. He told BBC News that he and Lamont had been the victims of whispering voices to the press. He later publicly approved the release of the papers. In December 2006, Major led calls for an independent inquiry into Tony Blair's decision to invade Iraq, following revelations made by Carney Ross, a former British senior diplomat, that contradicted Blair's case for the invasion. He was touted as a possible Conservative candidate for the Mayor of London elections in 2008, but turned down an offer from Conservative leader David Cameron. A spokesperson for Major said his political career is behind him. Following the 2010 general election, Major announced his support for the Cameron-Clegg coalition, and stated that he hoped for a Liberal-Conservative alliance beyond 2015, criticising Labour under Ed Miliband for playing party games rather than serving the national interest. Nevertheless, in 2013 Major expressed his concern at the seeming decline in social mobility in Britain. In every single sphere of British influence, the upper echelons of power in 2013 are held overwhelmingly by the privately educated or the affluent middle class. To me, from my background, I find that truly shocking. During the 2014 Scottish independence referendum, Major strongly encouraged a no vote, stating that a vote for independence would be damaging both for Scotland and the rest of the UK. Brexit. Major was a vocal supporter for the Remain camp in the 2016 referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. John Major supported a second referendum over Brexit, stating that the Leave campaign put out a fantasy case during the referendum campaign, adding that to describe a second vote as undemocratic was a rather curious proposition and that he could see no intellectual argument against redoing the ballot. Major feared Brexit will make the UK poorer and could endanger the peace settlement in Northern Ireland. On the 30th of August 2019, it was announced that Major intended to join a court case by Gina Miller against the proroguing of Parliament by the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. In the 2019 general election, Major urged voters to vote tactically against candidates supporting Boris Johnson when those candidates wanted a hard Brexit. Major said Brexit is the worst foreign policy decision in my lifetime. It will affect nearly every single aspect of our lives for many decades to come. It will make our country poorer and weaker. It will hurt most those who have least. Never have the stakes been higher, especially for the young. Brexit may even break up our historic United Kingdom. In early 2020, after the UK formally left the EU with an initial deal, Major expressed his concerns about a future trading deal with the EU being flimsy. Assessment and legacy. Major's mild-mannered style and moderate political stance contrasted with that of Thatcher, and made him theoretically well-placed to act as a conciliatory and relatively uncontroversial leader of his party. In spite of this, conflict raged within the Parliamentary Conservative Party, particularly over the extent of Britain's integration with the European Union. Major never succeeded in reconciling the Euro rebels among his MPs to his European policy, who, although relatively few in number, wielded great influence because of his small majority and their wider following among conservative activists and voters. Episodes such as the Maastricht Rebellion, led by Bill Cash and Margaret Thatcher, inflicted serious political damage on him and his government. The additional bitterness on the right wing of the Conservative Party at the manner in which Margaret Thatcher had been deposed did not make Major's task any easier, with many viewing him as a weak and vacillating leader. Ongoing sleaze-related scandals among leading Conservative MPs also did Major and his government no favours, decreasing support for the party amongst the public. His task became even more difficult after the election of the modernist and highly media-savvy Tony Blair as Labour leader in July 1994, who mercilessly exploited Conservative divisions whilst shifting Labour to the centre, thus making it much more electable. Whilst few observers doubted that Major was an honest and decent man, or that he made sincere and sometimes successful attempts to improve life in Britain and to unite his deeply divided party, he was also perceived as a weak and ineffectual figure, and his approval ratings for most of his time in office were low, particularly after Black Wednesday in September 1992, which destroyed the Conservatives' reputation for effective economic management. Major defended his government in his memoirs, focusing particularly on how under him the British economy had recovered from the recession of 1990 to 1993. He wrote that during my premiership interest rates fell from 14% to 6%, unemployment was at 1.75 million when I took office, and at 1.6 million and falling upon my departure, and the government's annual borrowing rose from £0.5 billion to nearly £46 billion at its peak before falling to £1 billion. Major's Chancellor Ken Clarke stated in 2016 that Major's reputation looked better as time went by, in contrast to that of Tony Blair's, which appeared to be in decline. Paddy Ashdown, the leader of the Liberal Democrats during Major's term of office, was more sympathetic, writing in 2017 that Major was one of the most honest, brave and sincere men to ever be Prime Minister, and that his time in office compares favourably with that of his successor Tony Blair. Writing shortly after he left office, the historian and journalist Paul Johnson wrote that Major was a hopeless leader who should never have been Prime Minister. The sentiments echoed that of much of the press at the time, which was generally hostile to Major, especially after Black Wednesday. The journalist Peter Oborne was one such figure, though writing in 2017 he stated that he now regrets his negative reporting, stating that he himself and the press in general were grossly unfair to Major and that this was motivated at least in part by snobbery at Major's humble upbringing. In 2012 Oborne had written that Major's government looks ever more successful as time goes by. Oborne singled out Major's achievements in the Northern Irish peace process, boosting the economy, keeping Britain out of the Eurozone, and his reforms of public services as being worthy of praise. Others remain unconvinced however, and, writing in 2011, the BBC's home editor Mark Easton judged that Majorism had made little lasting impact. In academic circles Major's legacy has generally been more well received. Mark Stewart, writing in 2017, stated that Major is the best ex-Prime Minister we have ever had, praising him for initiating the Northern Ireland peace process, peacefully handing Hong Kong back to China, creating the National Lottery and leaving a sound economy to Labour in 1997. Dennis Kavanagh likewise states that Major did relatively well considering the unbridgeable divides that existed in the Conservative Party in the 1990s, chiefly over Europe, whilst also delivering economic growth, a more user-focused public sector and the basis of peace settlement in Northern Ireland. He also notes that Major's unexpected 1992 election victory effectively sealed in the Thatcher-era reforms and forced the Labour Party to ditch most of its more socialist-tinged policies, thereby permanently shifting the British political landscape to the centre ground. Anthony Seldon largely agrees with this assessment, adding that Major's deep dislike of discrimination contributed to the continuing decline in racism and homophobia in British society, and that his proactive foreign policy stance maintained Britain's influence in the world at a time of profound global change. He also notes that Major faced a deeply unfavourable set of circumstances. Most of the obvious and pressing conservative reforms, for example reining in the power of trade unions and privatising failing industries, had already been completed under Thatcher. The swift nature of his rise to power left him little time to formulate policy positions, and upon becoming PM he was immediately thrust into having to deal with the Gulf War and a major recession. Furthermore, the narrow majority achieved after the 1992 election left him exposed to internal conservative rebellions, which only worsened as time went by, abetted by a hostile press, as it became clear the Conservatives would lose the next election. Selden concludes that Major was neither non-entity nor failure. His will be judged an important if unruly premiership at the end of the Conservative century, completing some parts of an earlier agenda while in some key respects helping to define a conservatism for the 21st century. Selden reiterated these views in his contribution to the 2017 volume John Major, An Unsuccessful Prime Minister? Political historian Robert Taylor, in his 2006 biography of Major, concurs with many of these points, summing up that in the perspective provided by the years of New Labour government since May 1997, John Major's record as Prime Minister looked much better than his many critics liked to suggest. Britain's most extraordinary Conservative Prime Minister bequeathed an important legacy to this party and his country to build on. One day both yet may come to recognise and appreciate it. Noted political historian Dick Leonard, however, writing in 2004, was more harsh in his assessment, concluding that Major was a man of evident decent instincts, but limited abilities. As Prime Minister he pushed these abilities to the limit. It was not enough. Representation in the media. During his leadership of the Conservative Party, Major was portrayed as honest John, but unable to exert effective control over his fractious party. However, his polite, easygoing manner was initially well received by both his supporters and his critics. Major's appearance was noted for its greyness, his prodigious philtrum, and large glasses, all of which were exaggerated in caricatures. For example, in Spitting Image, Major's puppet was changed from a circus performer to that of a literally grey man who ate dinner with his wife in silence, occasionally saying "nice peas, dear," while at the same time nursing an unrequited crush on his colleague Virginia Bottomley, an invention, but an ironic one in view of his affair with Edwina Currie, which was not then a matter of public knowledge. By the end of his premiership his puppet would often be shown observing the latest fiasco and ineffectually murmuring "oh dear." Long-standing Conservative MP Enoch Powell, when asked about Major, stated, "I simply find myself asking, does he really exist?" Whereas on the left Labour's Alistair Campbell dismissed him as a piece of lettuce that passes for Prime Minister, and Labour MP Tony Banks said of Major in 1994 that he was a fairly competent chairman of housing on Lambeth Council. Every time he gets up now I keep thinking, what on earth is Councillor Major doing? I can't believe he's here, and sometimes I think he can't either. The media, particularly The Guardian cartoonist Steve Bell, used the allegation by Alistair Campbell that he had observed Major tucking his shirt into his underpants to caricature him wearing his pants outside his trousers, as a pale grey echo of both Superman and Supermac, a parody of Harold Macmillan. Bell also used the humorous possibilities of the Cones hotline, a means for the public to inform the authorities of potentially unnecessary traffic cones, which was part of the Citizens Charter project established by John Major. Major was also satirized by Patrick Wright with his book 101 Uses for a John Major, based on a comic book of some 10 years earlier called 101 Uses for a Dead Cat, in which Major was illustrated serving a number of bizarre purposes, such as a train spotter's anorak or as a flagpole. Wright published a second collection of 101 Uses, as well as a parodic cartoon biography of Major entitled Not Inconsiderable, being the life and times of John Major. Private Eye parodied Sue Townsend's The Secret Diary of Adrian Mole, age 13 3/4, to run a regular column The Secret Diary of John Major, age 47 3/4, in which Major was portrayed as naive and childish, keeping lists of his enemies in a Ryman's notebook called his Bastards Book, and featuring My Wife Norman and Mr. Dr. Morini as recurring characters. The magazine still runs one-off specials of this diary, with the age updated, on occasions when Major is in the news, such as on the breaking of the Edwina Currie story or the publication of his autobiography. The impressionist comedian Rory Bremner often mocked John Major, for example depicting him as John 90, a play on 1960s puppet show Joe 90. His impersonation was so accurate that he managed to fool the MP Richard Boddy that he was really speaking to Major in a prank phone call. The incident prompted Cabinet Secretary Robin Butler to warn Channel 4 head Michael Grade against any further calls for fear that state secrets could be inadvertently leaked. Major was often mocked for his nostalgic evocation of what sounded like the lost Britain of the 1950s, see Merry England, for example, his famous speech stating that 50 years from now Britain will still be the country of long shadows on county grounds, warm beer, invincible green suburbs, dog lovers and pools fillers and, as George Orwell said, old maids bicycling to Holy Communion through the morning mist. Major complained in his memoirs that these words, which drew upon a passage in George Orwell's essay The Lion and the Unicorn, had been misrepresented as being more naive and romantic than he had intended, and indeed his memoirs were dismissive of the common conservative viewpoint that there was once a time of moral rectitude. Major wrote that life has never been as simple as that. Throughout his time in office, Major was often acutely sensitive to criticism of him in the press. His biographer Anthony Selden posits this to an inner vulnerability stemming from his difficult childhood and adolescence. After leaving office, Major stated that perhaps up to a point I was too sensitive about some of the things in the press. I'm happy to concede that. But the politicians who are said to have hides like rhinos and be utterly impervious to criticism, if they're not extinct, they are very rare, and I freely confess I wasn't amongst them. Major has been depicted on screen by Keith Drinkell in Thatcher, The Final Days, 1991, Michael Maloney in Margaret, 2009, Robin Kermode in The Iron Lady, 2011, and Mark Ozol in the TV series The Crown. Footage of Major's 1992 election win is used in Patrick Keeler's 1994 documentary film London. Major was also one of the prime ministers portrayed in the 2013 stage play The Audience. Less flatteringly, Major was the subject of the song John Major, Fuck You by Scottish punk band Oi Polloi. Personal life. Major married Norma Johnson, now Dame Norma Major, on the 3rd of October 1970 at St Matthew's Church, Brixton. She was a teacher and a member of the Young Conservatives. They met on polling day for the Greater London Council elections in London, and became engaged after only 10 days. They have 2 children, a daughter, Elizabeth, born November 1971, and a son, James, b. January 1975. John and Norma continue to live at their constituency home, Finings, in Great Stewkley, Huntingdonshire. The couple also own a flat in London and a holiday home on the Norfolk coast at Weybourne, which they have in the past invited ex-soldiers to use for free as part of the Afghan Heroes charity. As with all former prime ministers, Major is entitled to round-the-clock police protection. Elizabeth Major, a qualified veterinary nurse, married Luke Salter on the 26th of March 2000 at All Saints Church, Somerby, having been in a relationship with him since 1988. Salter died on the 22nd of November 2002 from cancer. James Major, a former retail manager and nightclub promoter, married game show hostess Emma Noble on the 29th of March 1999 in the chapel crypt at Westminster Abbey. The couple had a son, Harrison, born July 2000, who later diagnosed with autism. The marriage ended in an acrimonious divorce in 2003, with Noble accusing Major of unreasonable behavior. James later married Kate Pusselethwaite, née Dorrell, the mother of his second son. Major's elder brother Terry, who died in 2007, became a minor media personality during Major's period in Downing Street, writing a 1994 autobiography, Major, Memories of an Older Brother, and appearing on TV shows such as Have I Got News for You? John's sister Patricia Desoy kept a much lower profile. She died in 2017. After leaving office, Major became aware that his father fathered two half-siblings extramaritally, Tom Moss and Kathleen Lemon. Research conducted by Paul Penn Simpkins, a genealogist formerly employed as a researcher at the College of Arms and as a heraldic consultant at Christie's, and subsequently corroborated by Linda Rippin, a genealogist employed by Lincolnshire Council, showed that John Major and Margaret Thatcher were fifth cousins once removed, both descending from the Crust family, who farmed at Leek, near Boston, Lincolnshire. Major has been keen on sports since his youth, most notably cricket. He is also a supporter of Chelsea FC and a patron of British gymnastics. He also enjoys gardening, listening to music and reading, Anthony Trollope being among his favourite authors. Major is a Christian, though his upbringing was never especially religious, and he states that he is a believer at a distance. He shied away from the topic when in office, stating that I have always been a little wary of politicians who parade their faith, and prefer a little English reserve on the subject. Honours. In the 1999 New Year Honours list, Major was made a Companion of Honour for his work on the Northern Ireland peace process. On the 23rd of April 2005, Major was bestowed with a knighthood as a Companion of the Order of the Garter by Queen Elizabeth II. He was installed at St George's Chapel, Windsor on the 13th of June. Membership of the Order of the Garter is limited in number to 24, and as a personal gift of the Queen is an honour traditionally bestowed on former Prime Ministers. On the 20th of June 2008, Major was granted the Freedom of the City of Cork. He was also granted the Outstanding Contribution to Ireland Award in Dublin on the 4th of December 2014. On the 8th of May 2012, Major was personally decorated at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo by the Emperor of Japan with the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Rising Sun in recognition of his invaluable contributions to Japan. U.K. relations through his work in the political and economic arena, and also in promoting mutual understanding. While Prime Minister, Major had pursued energetic campaigns aimed at boosting bilateral trade, Priority Japan, 1991-94, and Action Japan, 1994-97. The 1991 Japan Festival also took place under his premiership. Awards. In 2008, Major won the British Sports Book Awards, Best Cricket Book, for More Than a Game, The Story of Cricket's Early Years. An oil painting of Major, painted in 1996 by June Mendoza, is part of the parliamentary collection, as is a bronze bust by Anne Curry, unveiled in the members' lobby on the 16th of October 2017. There is another bust of Major in the Norman Shaw Building North by Neil Andrew, sculpted in 1993 and installed in 2004. However, this is not accessible to the public. A large bust of John Major by Shinto Emery in Huntingdon Library was unveiled by his wife Norma in 1993. A painting of John Major by Dickon Swan is on display at the Carlton Club, and was unveiled by his wife Norma in 1994. The National Portrait Gallery holds two paintings of Major, the first official portrait of him as Prime Minister, painted by Peter Dayan in 1994, and one of John and Norma by John Wonnegott, painted in 1997. There is a large John Major suite at the Oval, home to Surrey County Cricket Club. The venue also contains a painting of Major. There is a heritage in Sutton plaque on St Helier Hospital, where John Major was born in 1943, and a plaque commemorating him in Archbishop's Park next to Lambeth Palace, included as part of the Lambeth Millennium Pathway. There are also various plaques commemorating facilities opened by John Major, at Brandton Memorial Centre, Brandton, opened 1988, Hamerton Zoo Park, Hamerton, 1990, Cadbury World, Birmingham, 1991, a tree commemorating the restoration of the River Mill Pub, Eton Socon, the Gardens at Inching Brook Hospital, Huntingdon, 2009, the North Terminal Extension at Gatwick Airport, 2011, Huntingdonshire Football Association Headquarters, Huntingdon, 2015, and Alconbury Weald Cricket Pitch, 2019. In 2013 the town of Candelita in Spain named a street for John Major, Avenida de John Major, as Major has holidayed there for many years. Major Close, in Loughborough Junction near where John grew up, is also named for him. The street was to be called Sir John Major Close. However, this long name breached council guidelines.